Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Virtually 2022, Nomentis free virtual web accessibility and digital inclusion conference. First of all, a massive thanks to Al Duggan and also Marley Fernando and Adi Latif for their two brilliant talks earlier. My clear text are providing live captions, which you can access either through Zoom or alternatively, we have provided a stream link, a stream text link in the chat, which I'll just drop in now for you. All sessions this week are recorded. We'll send them out to you shortly after the conference ends. But now it's time for our final session of day one with Bryce Johnson, co-inventor of Xbox's adaptive controller, with his talk, Recognize Exclusion, Design for Inclusion. Bryce will discuss the Xbox adaptive controller, something that required a new development approach that was drastically different from how the Microsoft devices team typically runs a program. To intentionally bring more people with limited mobility into gaming, the team needed to challenge their biases and assumptions, rethink how they designed and engineered controllers, and move the goalposts on how they measure a program's success. Bryce is going to share their experiences and give you tips on how you can design better control schemes or input for people with limited mobility in your hardware or games. Please do get involved in the discussion in the chat. Make sure your chat settings are switched to panelist attendees, and that way everyone can see your messages. And if you've got any questions, please do submit them using the Q&A box. So yeah, over to you, Bryce, to kick things off.
Yeah, thanks. I will say that if we want to talk, when we talk about controls and how to make them better for folks with limited mobility, I didn't prepare any material on that specifically today, but I'm super happy to answer questions about what we've learned. And so please put your questions in the chat. All right, let's get going. Oops. So there's our adaptive controller, which is what we're here to talk about today. But you may have seen an announcement from us last week with what is essentially the spiritual successor to the adaptive controller, which is the Microsoft Adaptive Accessories. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this today. We've just announced these. There's only so much that we're saying, but this is the next sort of step on our journey. As we continue to make adaptive accessories and adaptive devices for people with disabilities. You may have also seen an announcement that we've relaunched the Microsoft Inclusive Tech Lab, which is a facility that we have on campus for people with disabilities to come and engage with our development teams. We like to think of this as like an embassy on campus. Here's some more pictures of it and some of the displays that we have in there. So why are we doing this? I feel silly kind of saying this slide here today, which is, we know why we're doing this. There are over 1 billion people in the world that have disabilities. And at Microsoft, we believe that their exclusion hurts us all. And our inclusive design practice was founded around the time that the World Health Organization redefined their definition of disability from a personal health condition to a mismatch in human interactions. So some people call this the social model of disability. This is not the only model of disability. I just want to be clear that this is a model. We find the social model of disability pretty good for us as engineers and designers because it puts the onus on us to do something. So what does this mean? A mismatch in human interactions. It means if I'm a wheelchair user and I come into a building and I need to get to the second floor and I roll in and the only way for me to get to the second floor is a set of stairs, you have to understand what's the mismatch in interactions. What's the barrier? Well, the barrier isn't that I'm a wheelchair user. It's not my wheelchair. It's the fact that the architect designed a building with the only way to get to the second floor with being stairs. So disability in that case was designed. A mismatch in human interactions was unintentionally created. But before I get into our journey about how we think about inclusive design in context of the adaptive controller, I want to talk about a story where we had to do some accessibility fixes. So I'm not a fan of the idea of inclusive design just being accessibility work up the chain, like closer to the beginning of the project. I do think of them as different and complementary and required practices. But here are some accessibility fixes that we may have avoided with the Surface Laptop through inclusive design. So with our Surface Laptop 2, we unintentionally created layout challenges on the keyboard for the blind. So let me zoom in here, and I'm going to describe this. I've got a close-up of the keyboard right now. And what it's showing is the keys that I kind of want to highlight are the F4 key, which shares its function with mute, and the function lock key, which is on the bottom of the keyboard and it has a light. So if you're familiar with how blind people use computers, they primarily use computers through keyboard shortcuts. They don't use mice, things like that. And when I say blind here, I'm actually referring to fully blind, sightless folks. So what they do is they're using their keyboards, and the way that you close an application in Windows using a keyboard is Alt F4. So that's basically the command that lets you close that keyboard. So what the challenge that we created here unintentionally was that we put F4 on the same key as mute, and the only way that you can know which key that is whether or not that function lock key, which is on the bottom of the keyboard, is on or off. And the only way that we told people that function lock key was on or off was through that light. So you can imagine if you're blind that you can't see that function lock light LED. And you think that you're pressing Alt F4, and what you're really doing is muting your computer. So imagine if you're sighted, imagine you're doing a keyboard shortcut, you think you're closing an app and you shut off your screen, right? So muting the keyboard or muting a computer, someone's going to lose access to their screen reader. So we created this bug basically that we had to go fix. So with Surface Laptop 3 and all of our Surface keyboards since then, we did a few intentional changes to the keyboards to enhance them for the blind. The first thing we did was we moved mute off F4 and replaced it with volume up. So it's a non-destructive behavior. So when you hit volume up, or when you hit F4, it goes volume up. So you're not going to inadvertently sort of turn off access to your screen reader. The next thing we did was we actually worked with the HID consortium to get function lock added to the HID specification. So this is a little bit complicated. Before Surface Laptop 3, function lock and function keys on keyboards, they did not communicate their state to the OS. They were keys that were largely used on the keyboard, and the OS didn't need to know what they were. It was never assumed that the OS needed to know what that key was doing. They were just keys that modified your keyboard. So we commissioned the consortium to let us add this key to the HID specification, the human interface device specification for keyboards, so that we could communicate the state of function lock to the OS, so that screen readers could pick that up and know whether this was function lock on or function lock off. This is how caps lock works today on keyboards. So we went in and did that, and we had to get basically all the members of the consortium to agree to it. So like Apple, Google, everybody agreed, yep, let's do it. So that was another thing that we did. Now, the last thing that we did was I know it's difficult to see on the F4 key, there's a little dot, a tiny little dot. And what that is there for is that on traditional desktop keyboards, there are gaps between the F4 and F5 and F8 and F9 keys. And those gaps were a wayfinding mechanism so that people could kind of use them. So just like the bumps on F and J, those gaps had tactile significance. And on a laptop keyboard, those gaps are gone. So we added those bumps back in to bring back tactile significance to the F row so that blind users could more easily touch type. So that was us fixing some bugs. We fixed some bugs on our Surface keyboards going forward. I'm actually really proud of that work. It was really important for us to do that. But that led us to this. In a way, it led us to this. So what I'm showing right now are images of the Surface Adaptive Kit, which is a product that we launched last fall. And what they are, let me actually just show you how we describe them. Simple aftermarket adaptations from Microsoft that enhance the function of people with disabilities while staying true to the elegance of the Surface form. So I'm going to just hide that for a second. So these are basically a set of augmentations that you can apply And one of the reasons why we came to this was because after we were launching the tactile bumps on F4 and F8, I'd go out and I'd talk to blind users and I'd go, hey, what do you think of these? And one of the things I got back from a deputy minister of accessibility for the government of Canada was she told me that she wished she had a bump on F7. And I was like, why F7? And she goes, well, that's my spell check button. And I use that button all day long. So I really need to know where it is. And that was one of the things that inspired us with the Surface Adaptive Kit. If you look at the image in the upper right, you can see that we have two different types of keyboard tactility augmentations. We either have these ones that are high contrast and glue-like, or we have these ones that are semi-translucent, that are purely meant to be sort of touched. So one of them is meant to be more visible for, say, folks like low vision who want that tactile indicator. But the other one is meant to be kind of as invisible as possible for people who don't want to necessarily advertise that their keyboard has augmentations on it. So that was the Surface Adaptive Kit. So let's get to the main sort of show here and talk about the Xbox Adaptive Controller. I'm going to play our Super Bowl ad in case, you know, as a kind of a way to introduce the product.
My name is Grover.
Sean. My name is Ian.
I'm Taylor.
My name is Owen, and I am 9.5 years old.
I only have one.
And yeah.
I love video games, my friends, my family, and again, video games.
Whenever I play it, it makes me feel happy.
The fun that you get to have with connecting with your friends.
Do you make your own rules?
It's his way of interacting with his friends when he can't physically otherwise do it.
When I'm playing with a regular controller, there's some things that don't work for me.
It's difficult for me to use both joysticks and the D-pad at the exact same time.
And it just slowed me down a bunch more while other people were like...
She's never had the freedom to play at the level she knows she could.
I had never thought it was unfair. I just thought, hey, this is the way it is and it's not going to change.
What I like about the adaptive controller is that now everyone can play.
I don't even have to look at the controller and just be like looking at the screen like, hey, yep.
You never want your kid to feel like an outsider or an other.
One of the biggest fears early on is, how will Owen be viewed by the other kids? He's not different when he plays.
It's a little challenging, but that's the whole point of gaming.
I can hit the buttons just as fast as they can.
And I think I can crush my friends.
No matter how your body is or how fast you are, you can play. It's a really good thing to have in this world.
So yeah, that was our Super Bowl ad for the adaptive controller. And when that ad launched, this tweet came out the next day or shortly after from Dear Miss Hashim. And she said, today we watched and rewatched and reflected upon this Microsoft commercial with first grade. And here are some of their thoughts. Some kids cannot change. It doesn't mean they can't play. Microsoft did not want the kids to change, so they changed the remote. Yep, they nailed it. That's basically the brief. I want to talk about some of the motivations behind the controller and how we think about it a few years after we launched it. This is a wonderful article from Alex Miller about how video games are saving those who serve. Now, if your introduction to the adaptive controller was through the Super Bowl ad, you'd think that we made it for kids, but we actually started working with veterans. So one of the pieces of information from this article that is really important is this line that veterans are 1.5 more times likely to commit suicide than the general population. And that's veterans in general, not only veterans with disabilities. So there's another quote in this article from our friend Ken Jones, who was with us from the very beginning with the Xbox Adaptive Controller. And he says, once those disabled veterans were able to get back into gaming, they'd come back with positive attitudes towards therapy. Playing video games was a major plus for them. So many people are alive today because of these technologies. Many would have committed suicide otherwise. So I think what you have to realize, and what we realized kind of when we started back in 2015, and we started with Josh Price, who's the guy on the right, Sergeant Josh Price, he was the guy that basically introduced us through Ken Jones and through Warfighter Engaged to this idea of modular gaming. And when I say us, I kind of mean the whole team. Like, I think a bunch of us, were aware of this community, but Josh, came to visit Microsoft and really showed a lot of people and, told us that these realities that I think became very apparent really quickly. If you're in service today, you grew up playing video games. When you're deployed, your social life can largely be just playing video games with your squad. And veterans are socially outside of the norm. When they come back to society, they have a hard time integrating back into society in general. And so if you're someone who's been injured while you've been in service, that becomes even harder for you to come back into society. So, all you have in many ways is playing video games with like the people that you were deployed with your squad. And when that is taken away from you, you really become isolated. And so we met with Josh, we met with Corporal Todd Nicely, who's there on the left. I don't know if either that might not be their current rank. I really should look that up because they might have gotten promotions since then. But you can see Todd as a quad amputee using a very special sort of setup. But I think like with a few years of us looking at this, we kind of came to the conclusion, and it was always there from the beginning, we just couldn't articulate it, that we created the Xbox Adaptive Controller for gamers with limited mobility, but we were inspired to support the mental health of the veterans that we partnered with. So when we think about the interrelated needs of disability and how we think about that in inclusive design, it's important to recognize the barriers. Absolutely. You got to recognize the barriers, but you also have to keep in mind the things that are good, the things that are they're there for. Inclusive design isn't only about eliminating the bad things, it's about bringing out the joy. And that, is something that I think is a practice we need to be very aware of. So these are our Microsoft inclusive design principles. This is the foundation that we use to build our inclusive design practice. Recognize exclusion, learn from diversity, solve for one, and extend to many. And I'm going to give you an example of each one of these from the adaptive controller journey. But first, I also want to talk a little bit about, I know I'm going all over the place in this one, but I want to give you a lot of information because we have time. We have a document that we use, that we created, that we use, called Understanding Function and Design for Disabilities. And this document is something that we use to help our teams have a common language of terminology when talking about functional limitations from disability. And the one thing I really want to stress, because I have to stress it, I must stress it every time we talk about this, is that we believe in nothing about us without us. We design for people with disabilities. This document is not meant to replace engaging with the community at all. That is the opposite of what we want to do. This document is here to give us a way to talk about, with a common language, the things that we encounter when we engage the disability community. It's really just a dictionary. So we break down function. I also want to say we're inspired by the World Health Organization's International Classification of Function. We created a version that was a little more lighter weight, less medically focused, more focused on product makers. So we break it down into these categories. What is cognition? What is mobility? What is vision? What is hearing? What is voice, speech, and communication? What is sensation and perception? I think that we need to get back to this document and think, especially after the pandemic, and think more about how we can add mental health to here. But I want to make sure that I'm engaging with the right types of professionals to do this correctly. I don't want to do mental health I want to make sure we do mental health correctly. So let me give you an example. The way that we kind of think about it is, the way that this document tends to work is we describe barriers that can happen because of a functional limitation. And then we offer examples of facilitators that help people overcome those barriers. So when we talk about vestibular challenges, sensory system that informs our sense of balance and orientation, One of the barriers is that the motion on screens, if you have an iPhone, the default transition is very dynamic. And when Apple released that, they got feedback from their customers that it was giving some of them headaches, right? Because, we have our phones in our face all day long. And so Apple basically went in, they fixed that bug. They changed, they have a reduced motion setting in their accessibility settings that allow you to change the transition to something that is not so dynamic, to help people who have challenges with vestibular disorders. So, all right, back to our principles. Recognizing exclusion. Exclusion happens when we solve problems using our own biases. As Microsoft designers, we seek out those exclusions and use them as opportunities to create new ideas and inclusive designs. So let's talk about game controllers. Our wonderful Xbox controller, our beloved Xbox controller. I think it's the greatest controller you can buy. Your opinions may vary, but that's mine. This is a Generation 8 controller. So this is an Xbox One's controller in this photo with my daughter's half-painted fingernails. And so let's describe how over many generations of controller designs, we unintentionally introduced barriers by optimizing around a primary use case. So the way that controllers are designed, we assume that users can use two hands and operate two thumbsticks at the same time. And so if from understanding function, this would be challenges and barriers with grasp and fine motor control. We assume people have the fine motor control to hit all the buttons. There are 17 buttons on an Xbox controller. Sometimes game designers assume that people can hit buttons simultaneously. So from understanding function, that's fine motor control, that's coordination, that's control, voluntary versus involuntary control. We assume that people can reach around to the bumpers and triggers because we've designed it in a way that we assume that those index fingers are going to go around and reach those bumpers and triggers. So from understanding function, that's muscle tone, posture, coordination. And then we also assume that people have the endurance to hold it for an extended period of time, that they're going to be able to hold it all day. When we assume this because, at the time, like when we were doing the adaptive controller, everyone in Xbox would play video games all weekend long. The idea of the controller being too heavy to hold was a very foreign idea. And that was because we weren't actively addressing our biases and trying to understand how some people might not use it like we do. So for here, we've got muscle tone, endurance, and posture. So those were all the things that we had to recognize that we'd created in our typical game controller, so that were causing barriers to people with disabilities. And that was up to us. We created the problem. So learn from diversity. Human beings are the real experts in adapting to diversity. Inclusive design puts people in the center from the very start of the process, and those fresh, diverse perspectives are the key to true insight. We worked with 5 charities from the very beginning of the adaptive controller program. We believe at Microsoft in nothing about us without us. So working with these charities so early in a hardware program is basically unheard of. And I don't just mean for us, I mean like in the industry in general. Like hardware development tends to be very secretive, and there's a lot of really good reasons why we need to keep those secrets. But we believe that we design with the community, with the disability community, not for the disability community. So it was vital for us to bring in folks from the very beginning. So the way that we did that is that we started with charities. I mentioned Warfighter Engaged and Ken Jones. They were with us from the very beginning. And then we brought in Able Gamers, the Cerebral Palsy Foundation, Craig Hospital, Special Effect. I'm wearing my Special Effect t-shirt today for you folks in the UK. So all of these charities were super important for us to figure out what we needed to do. And all these photos are from Special Effect. And the reason why it was so great to work with all these groups was that they all had similar goals. They wanted to get people with disabilities playing video games, but they all had fairly different operational models of how they would approach it. So Warfighter Engaged, because they work largely with veterans and disabled veterans, and they work in that kind of disabled veteran medical community, heavily into prosthesis and things like that. They would build everything custom, and they still do to this day. They build a lot of custom stuff. That's kind of their jam. So when we saw them with Todd, they brought Todd's controller. I showed you, Todd was the quad amputee that I talked about earlier. They brought Todd's controller with him to Microsoft when he came to visit. And they told us, well, we have 2 of these because if one of them breaks, Todd's got to ship it back to Ken to fix it. So he needs one to use while he's getting the other one fixed. So that's really wild, like that Ken's building 2 controllers for all these guys, you know. They're very, very custom to their needs. Able Gamers, largest gaming disability charity in the US. Because of the way that the US works and the way that their charity works, they take in requests. They take in a lot of requests to basically get adaptive video game setups for people. They remotely work with the people, and not remotely, not just because of the pandemic, but because the US is very big. You know, they do everything sort of remotely, and they do all their coordination remotely. And then they basically send them a package that with their controller, and they say, here you go, this is yours. You know, have fun. Whereas special effect, you know, I think the interesting thing about special effect is, you know, the UK is relatively small compared to the US, and special effect can put in an occupational therapist and a technician. They can put them in a van. They can fill that van full of stuff. They can drive to your house and they can build you a controller in your living room. And what's really cool about that is that when your needs change, they can come back and they can swap out the parts that they don't, that you don't need anymore and give you new stuff. So sort of different from, it's sort of along the lines of Warfighter in the sense of like that there's much more constant relationship with the client, whereas Able Gamers is much more of a grant system. They kind of send stuff out. But you know, we had to create a device that supported all these different operational models. And the other thing that we noticed as we kept doing this work, and you can see this in here, there's always people in the background of these photos. And so while the controller was designed, you know, to help people with limited mobility, another key stakeholder that we considered was the caregiver and the needs of the caregiver and the challenges that caregivers have. What's really interesting about caregivers is how often do you learn technology that you're not going to personally use? And that's what caregivers have to do. They have to learn how to use tech that they're not going to use. And that's a big deal. It's hard. It should be recognized that that's a hard thing to do. So this last principle, solve for one, extend to many. Everyone has abilities and limits those abilities. Designing for people with permanent disabilities actually results in designs that benefit people universally. Constraints are a beautiful thing. So the way that we typically talk about that is we talk about in our inclusive design materials, we talk about this idea that's pretty prevalent in the accessibility world of, you know, there are permanent conditions, there are temporary limitations, and then there are situational limitations. So to put an example in each of those, a permanent condition would be like, I'm limb different, I only have one arm. Whereas a temporary limitation would be, I have broken my left arm, I am temporarily one-armed. And a situational limitation is, you know, I'm holding a baby, my one arm is busy, I'm situationally one-armed, or I'm drinking a cup of tea, this arm is busy. So that's one way that we look at that. The other way that I really started to think about with the adaptive controller and how we kind of think about this now is we think about the needs of different types of disabilities, the interrelated needs of disability. So what I mean by that is, so this fellow was visiting our original Inclusive Tech Labs, and he is a high tetraplegic. So he literally does not have any movement from the neck down. And we are setting him up here with a mouth controller, quad stick, that he is plugged into the adaptive controller. I think he was going to play some Rocket League. And what he uses is he uses that joystick with his mouth. And when he blows into it, it's one button. And when he sucks on it, it's a separate button. So he has a joystick and two buttons that he can use with just his mouth. And so that was one of the more extreme cases that we think about with the adaptive controllers, is someone like this. But then we have our friend Cherry Thompson, and they have a very different condition. They have a condition that causes them to have basically weak finger strength. So they have a really hard time pressing down on the joysticks as buttons. So I mentioned that Xbox controllers have 17 buttons. Actually, Gen 9, the newest controllers, have 18 buttons. 2 of those buttons are pressing down on those sticks as buttons. So not only using them as joysticks, but pressing them so that they can be used as a button. And that's a really hard movement for Cherry. So what they do is they use a feature that we have called Copilot that allows them to sync 2 controllers to the Xbox. This is something that was very important to us. And actually, I will tell you, without Copilot, the adaptive controller would not be in this form. It would be a different form. Copilot gave us the freedom to explore such a unique form, because you can always co-pilot or a typical traditional controller with the adaptive controller. So what Cherry does, they take those 2 big buttons on the adaptive controller and they remap them from A and B to left and right stick press. They sync the adaptive controller and the typical controller through Copilot to their Xbox console. And then all they have to do those problematic stick presses is let their hands drop and press those buttons on those big buttons on the adaptive controller, so let gravity do the work. They don't have the strength to push those sticks, so they just let gravity do the work, their hand drop, and they use those big buttons instead of stick presses. And that's another completely valid way that we saw and looked at how people use the adaptive controller. It's important to kind of note, I think, and I didn't say this before, but the reason why we call the controller the adaptive controller is not that you adapt to it, it's that it adapts to you. So we're really trying to create a device that allows you to use it in multiple ways. There's a million different ways of it. One of the things that we struggled with early on during the development process is our engineering partners and the people who make traditional controllers kept asking us, well, what's the primary use case of this controller? Because they're good engineers and that's what they've been trained to do, is to think about the primary use case. And the only answer that we gave them that actually really made any sense, like the answer that we came to as a team eventually, was, well, there is no primary use case for the adaptive controller. Controllers in general, the primary use case is the typical controller. Most people use that. The adaptive controller is meant for all the alternate use cases. And that's really kind of what, as a team, what we got to that point and agreed to that was how that worked. So recognizing exclusion, we had to recognize that a traditional game controller is optimized around a primary use case that makes assumptions about how it's used. And we had to recognize that when our controller wasn't used as it was designed, that it was the barrier, that we created the barrier. So we engaged across the gaming accessibility community for Learn from Diversity. And we were given not only insight into the functionality of the device and what it enables, but how the form reflects on the user. I think this was something that the Cerebral Palsy Foundation told us really early on, and it was wonderful advice, and was that, there's a lot of stigma in assistive technology. There's a lot of, they can look really medical, or if you have assistive technology, sometimes it can look really childish, look like primary school, because it's all really bright colors all the time. So how do you think about that when it came to the design of the form? And while our industrial design team and partners and the teammates that were working on this product would never make something that wasn't part of the Xbox family, this feedback really did sort of push them to make sure that we could create something that really did feel like it was a premium Xbox product. So the last one, solve for one, extend to many. So we looked across lots of different types of mobility. We started with limb difference, we moved on to tetraplegia, we went to cerebral palsy, we think about neurological conditions like muscular dystrophy. But we also think about the situation, right? Like, are they a gamer? Are they a caregiver? Are they a maker? Makers are important because all of those charities that I talked about were makers. Like, the things that you plug into the adaptive controller and the way that you configure it, sometimes you need to actually go build something. And we had to support makers to allow them to do that. Because our ultimate goal is that the adaptive controller allows people to build a controller that fits them. So I want to get in, just as we kind of wind down here, I want to get into some design stories around the adaptive controller, a little, behind the scenes. So these are some early, really early prototypes of the adaptive controller. The industrial designer of the adaptive controller is Chris Gajowski. So these are some really early mock-ups that he did. You can see that we had some of the controls in the center. We had the big buttons. You can see there's pencil marks on those sharp corners because we originally had sharp corners and people told us that people were going to get hurt. Another thing that we learned is we were also originally really very boxy. And people would tell us, well, if they're going to rest their hands and press these buttons, that lip, that sharp edge there is really going to hurt them after a while. So you really should slope this down. So which was really wonderful advice, like to take this device and slope it down so that people could, have a little bit of a ramp to it. This is a later mock-up. This is actually probably really close to what the final form was going to be. But at this point, Chris was thinking about, it's about the distance between the buttons so that it's easily enough to navigate them, but you need to have space between them also to rest your hand along the way. So in some of the earlier mock-ups, you could have seen everything was really tight together, probably because we were thinking about movement. But this is us kind of balancing it out and giving space there for people to have places to place their hand where they're not pressing a button. This video shows the package design for the adaptive controller, which has won a lot of well-deserved awards and really revolutionized our packaging practice at Microsoft. This team went on this journey with us and created a packaging system that really was very intentionally well designed for people with limited mobility. I'm going to play this video again, and I'm going to take you through how it works. So there's a tape loop and you have one digit, you pull that tape off, the outer mailer just basically falls off. There's another tape loop that exposes a ribbon. And then you take that ribbon and you can kind of like jimmy open the box. And then the adaptive controller is sitting on a little tray that has another loop. You can slide that out. And then underneath that is a little looped container that contains the cord. There are no ties or tape other than what you've seen on here. And the tray that the adaptive controller sits on is the quick start guide. So the packaging team did a wonderful job. And like I said, this has changed how we think about packaging across our Surface devices. If you look at the Surface Adaptive Kit, you can see a bit of that evolution. But even if you look at something like Surface Pro, it's a little more subtle, the packaging evolutions, but it's definitely there. A lot of our pull tabs have gotten a lot bigger. Not everything has loops because we tried loops. And some folks would get the loops were actually problematic for a larger majority of people. So in our traditional products, we tend to just use larger tabs instead of loops. So to wrap up here, I want to give you some advice of what I've learned kind of on this journey and how we think about and the traps that I've sort of fallen into and how we sort of think about that. So under recognizing exclusion, it's important to remember that everyone has biases. We all have biases, but we can't let our assumptions or our comfort get the best of us. So it is vital that we go out and engage with the disability community and practice nothing about us without us. Because if we don't, unintentional exclusion is going to creep into our products. You can't, I don't believe it's possible to put yourself in someone else's shoes. So I really don't. I mean, I think that you can engage with the community enough so that you have a good idea. But for us, like we try to engage as often as we can. And I'm not saying we're perfect. We could do a lot better. But we're on this journey to do better kind of constantly. The Inclusive Tech Lab is part of that commitment. It's that, listen, we built this facility to do this journey. With the disability community, to bring them in, to engage with our product teams, to be stakeholders in the things that we do. Learn from diversity. Doing exactly what one person says may steer you in the wrong direction and in incomplete insight. So I recently taught a class at the University of Washington, and I asked the students to go out and meet people with disabilities, and they were like, "Oh, I don't know anybody with disabilities." And I'm like, "Well, you better go meet some." And I kind of eased up on this rule for them a little bit. I let them talk to one person. But with our engineering teams, I really try to get them to engage with more than one person of a specific type of disabilities. And the reason is that, you know, when someone tells you what they want, they're telling you what they want. So I have these designers and engineers that have been in the game for like 20 years. And they would never take the feedback of a customer at face value and just go implement it for a typical customer. But for some reason, because of their unfamiliarity with disability, sort of coupled with their desire to do good. A lot of times I see designers and engineers meet someone with disabilities, that they ask that person what they want. And when that person tells them what they want, they're like, great, I'm going to go do it. And that's cool. The intent is cool, but it's a bit of a trap because you should engage with more people in the community to get a greater sense of the challenges and the barriers to synthesize the proper solution. So we should do that. And that kind of leads to this last one, which was something that Susan Goldsman said in our original Inclusive the Film, Microsoft's Inclusive the Film. You can find it on our Inclusive Design. You can find it at that URL that's here on the screen. What Susan said was, and I'm going to paraphrase it here, is that it's vital to engage with the community, but it's not up to them to define the solution. We're the professional designers. We're the professional designers and we're the professional engineers. We come up with the solutions. That's our job. Our job is to engage with the community to find out the barriers and the challenges that they have, but we should not put the responsibility on them to articulate solutions. And what this leads me to is this notion of, like, when we talk about inclusive design, we're really not just talking about accommodation. We're really trying to strive for innovation. And, it's the world of disability is so rich. There's lots of room for innovation there, and not just for people with disabilities, but for everyone. And so I really do encourage people to really dig deeper. And with that, I think I am done. I want to thank everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Bryce. What a great talk. Super inspiring. And yeah, it's amazing work you're doing. I loved what you said about the adaptive controller and how, it's not about adapting to it. It adapts to you. I think that's amazing. If anyone's got any questions, please do submit them now. I can see a couple in there already. So Bryce, like user testing and listening to your community is kind of clearly central to your work. Kind of how much research kind of did go into this, and kind of what was a timeline like from kind of concept to delivery on the controller?
Yeah, so we spent about 3 years from our initial first musings to like the final product. The first 18 months was us really hacking. It was us kind of like doing this on the side. We went through 2 hackathons at Microsoft with it, our yearly hackathons, and really just kind of developing the idea, getting it ready to pitch. And we did this in partnership with the Xbox hardware team. So they knew what was going on. Like the second hackathon, the Xbox hardware team gave us 2 interns, like to help develop the prototype. So we were developing this along the way. So the last 18 months are basically, now it's a program, now it's a real thing, now we're going to go build it. And so we'd done a lot of prototyping in the first 18 months, but now it was like, okay, we'll pick a direction, refine that concept. So all the prototypes I showed you are from the last 18 months. They're not from the first 18 months, because the first 18 months, there was a lot of different things. Right? And we had to basically change a lot of, like I said, of how we develop a hardware program. We brought in people from the outside, which is unheard of because, we need confidentiality in our hardware programs, but we also have this value that we're trying to strive up to. So yeah, that was one of those things that's how that kind of went.
Awesome, thank you. So we have a question here from Sajinder, who's asking, Bryce, thanks for bringing to life the Xbox Adaptive Controller. Would you say that selecting charities from one market, i.e. UK or US, is subjective for products designed for global markets, or would selecting global charities be advisable? If it's the latter, how would we identify these?
With all, in the humblest way possible, yes, we should be more global. And I don't know how to answer that last part because I don't have the answer to that last part. I will tell you that, yes, our original charities were very Western centric. We recognize that. And since then, you know, we've gotten our teams in China to try to find more folks. We've partnered with some charities in Brazil. We're really close with like a hospital in Israel. And, you know, we even went to other parts of Europe. You know, we kind of broke out more. We have partners like in France and things like that. But yeah, I really want to crack this nut because I agree. I think this is super important, especially I think for our productivity products. I mean, game controllers and, you know, the markets of console gaming are fairly Western. But as we think about the Microsoft adaptive accessories and mice and keyboards, you know, the Microsoft adaptive accessories are meant to be used with PCs and mobile phones. So, you know, we do have to think a lot more globally. So yeah, I'm sorry I don't have an answer for you. I just want you to know that I constantly ask this myself of us and our team. But that's where we're at with that.
Awesome, thank you. So we've got a question here from Lorenzo.
We're not going to take Bob's.
Sorry.
Sorry, Lorenzo's question, please.
Lorenzo asks, they say, I love the Xbox controller, but I was wondering if there's a reason why the analog sticks are not symmetric.
So just to be clear, on the Xbox adaptive controller, those aren't, there are no analog sticks. There are no joysticks on the Xbox adaptive controller. And let me explain. And for some reason, I can't find my controller. What we found when we went out into the community, sorry, I have a lot of stuff. This is a controller. This is a joystick that could be plugged into the Xbox adaptive controller. This is for tetraplegics who don't have any finger movement, you know, goalposts like this. And then there's this little button that was designed here. This was designed by Craig Hospital for their tetraplegic population. The challenge with the adaptive controller, especially one of the big challenges for us, and one of the things that we really stay laser focused on when we create these accessories is cost. And because, you know, we know that this community doesn't have a lot of money, and we've seen how expensive some of the peripherals can be for this. And I'm not trying to wag my finger at any other peripheral makers about their costs. I know why things are expensive, don't get me wrong. But I also recognize that, you know, at Microsoft, we have this opportunity to kind of do better. So we wanted the adaptive controller to be $100. So there are no joysticks with it. Because of Copilot, you could always Copilot and use the thumbsticks on a typical controller in conjunction with the adaptive controller. So if you're, say, someone who's limb different and you only have one hand, you can use half a regular controller and then augment the rest of it with the adaptive controller. Like we showed with Josh in the very beginning. That was inspired by Josh in the very beginning. So, sorry. So we don't include joysticks with the adaptive controller because that joystick that I just showed you sells for around $100. And, you know, I don't want to give any cost. There's other simpler ones that are sort of these handheld ones that sell for around $20. But I don't want to give any cost to someone who might not use it. I didn't want to include anything in the box that someone would have to pay for that they might not use. So that's how we approached it. And, you know, we learn a lot from that. I will say, you know, we get a lot of people from the community who reach out and they go, you know, this is a good start, but this is what I would do to make it more accessible. and they list off things. And what they typically are doing, and is completely understandable, is they're really telling me what they would do to make it more accessible for them or the people that they care about. And they're not thinking about the entire limited mobility community at the same time, which is, again, completely understandable. So I get tetraplegics who are coming in, they're telling me all this stuff I should do, and I'm sitting there going, well, that's no good for someone with muscular dystrophy, and that would actually hurt someone with, like, muscular dystrophy. So those are the kinds of things that we keep in that balance.
Brilliant, thank you. Bryce, you mentioned your inclusive design principles. Are these kind of applied across all of Microsoft, so like software as well, or are these kind of unique to kind of Microsoft devices and kind of the more hardware side of things? And kind of how long have these been implemented?
So I will say, it's funny that you put it that way. The Microsoft inclusive design methodology was first published in 2015. Does it apply across all our products? It's not like a policy. It's a set of design methods. So, we encourage teams to practice inclusive design, but people are at very different parts of their journey, right? So what I mean by that is, let's say you've got something like SharePoint, which has been around a really long time. They have a lot of accessibility bugs that they need to go fix. And sometimes when they design new features, they could go into an inclusive design process and think about how that works. But there is always a difference between bug fixing and kind of other things there. So, what makes me laugh is that you think that they came out of hardware, and they didn't. They absolutely came out of software. And it really starts from this place of one of the other sort of foundational pieces of what we thought of with our inclusive design practice. And I'll give you a little bit of the behind the scenes here, and you can read Kat Holmes' book on Mismatched, and we were all there when that was happening, right? So what we talk about is this idea of one size fits one. And that's a little bit of at the time, it was a little bit of a pushback against this idea of universal design. And so what I mean by that is, in universal design, you talk about the built environment, you talk about all this stuff, this idea of curb cuts and what have you, having these intentional design solutions that benefit everyone. That's all great. But the thing that we were kind of pushing against was this idea of things being fixed, right? Like a curb cut is a curb cut. Now with software, nothing has to be fixed. Everything is fluid, right? Responsive design is this idea that everyone talks about your design being responsive to the viewport of the interface. Responsive design is about accessibility. I mean, Aaron Gustafsson said that, like, I need to be able to see and use this interface on the device I have. How is that not accessibility, right? I don't mean to like, interfaces are for humans. Computers don't care about that. So when we take this idea of one size fits one in software and make it and really kind of go to a place of ultimately what we're trying to do is just create personalization that brings human diversity into account, right? That's one way of looking at it, right? Like, software is infinitely malleable. So if universal design is everyone gets an extra large t-shirt and it's like huge on a lot of you and small on me, like, well, okay, it kind of works. But what would be better is that if we all had t-shirts that fit us perfectly, and that's what we think about, like, with inclusive designs. How do we make these things fit? So in software, you can see it. You can see basically software is malleable, it can change. Hardware, so I started in software, moved through the adaptive controller, I moved into hardware. Now we're taking these ideas and we're trying to apply them to hardware, right? And we talk very actively with the Microsoft Adaptive Accessories about one size fits one, right? That's an important thing for us, and that's how that accessory can adapt. But we have to recognize that hardware is not as malleable as software is. So we think more about these systems of engagement, right? We think about, like with the adaptive accessories, like, how does this thing evolve, and change and meet the needs of people. And so how do we think about that across a number of our accessories? I hope that answers your question.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's brilliant. I loved your t-shirt analogy. That's brilliant. I think yeah, that's just about all we have time for today. Bryce, thank you so much. That was a brilliant talk. Yeah, I think it's super important and really inspiring. Yeah, thanks to everyone that tuned in. And also thanks to My Clear Text for providing live captions today. That's day one of Virtually Done, and we're back tomorrow for day two with talks from Joel Strohmeyer from here at No Mensa, the Ministry of Justice Accessibility Team, and NBC Universal's Laurie Samuels. So please do sign up for those talks if you haven't done so already. You can do that over on Eventbrite. Yeah, if you have any accessibility issues or questions for our team here at No Mensa, we would love to hear from you. Please do get in touch and drop us a line at hello@nomensa.com. And we're also growing and have lots of roles available here at No Mensa across design, UX development, DevOps, and lots more. So check out nomensa.com/careers for more information. We'd love to hear from you. Bryce, thank you again. Thank you everyone else, and we'll see you tomorrow. Cheers.
Thanks.
Thank you.